Hello, this is Dave Hurwitz, Executive Editor at ClassicsToday.com, here to talk to you about the best and some of the worst recordings of Mahler's Symphony Number 9. Now, this symphony has a sort of cosmic significance because, of course, it was Mahler's last completed symphony. But even beyond that, it's you would think an incredibly difficult symphony to do because it ends with this enormous adagio, and interpretively it's an open book. Mahler didn't live to conduct it. It was premiered by Bruno Walter, and that last movement can last anywhere from about 18 minutes to about half an hour, which is really astonishing when you think about it, for a piece of that length to have that kind of flexibility in pulse. And it changes the whole balance of the symphony depending on how you do it, because the symphony has this enormous first movement, which can also last about half an hour and often does, and then two quicker inner movements, and then this finale. You would think that it would phase a lot of conductors and come off quite badly, but the fact of the matter is it's been incredibly lucky on disc. I've got 16 recordings sitting here next to me that I'm going to be showing you, plus a whole pile more in various locations and other things that we can talk about. But what really impresses me about this symphony is that it seems to bring out the best in everybody who does it. Everybody gives it just 100% effort, and the result is often astoundingly good. So it's going to be almost impossible to pick just one or two or even three preferred best recordings, because it really depends on what you want in the work, and depending on the interpretation, it can come across as a very, very different piece in terms of the balance of emotional tension between the different movements. It really can. And I like to hear different performances in different spots, in different moods. Sometimes I like the finale quicker, sometimes slower, sometimes I want a first movement that's apocalyptic, sometimes I find it better if it's played with little bit less heat and hysteria at first, so you could save some for later. I mean, it offers so many wonderful interpretive choices. So I think that we have to keep that in mind in listening and evaluating these recordings, because there is no one way to play the piece. There simply isn't. And while that's true of all great works and that we have in multiple interpretations because we want to hear how they're going to go, I don't think there's another symphony that you can really tinker with interpretively as much as the Ninth without damaging its basic emotional message, which of course is absolutely devastating. The final adagio is transcendent and ends with death. I mean, everybody knows what's happening in it. It has no program, but there's no question what's going on. The first movement, is a surging melody that gets bombed every time it tries to get over the hump. The two inner movements, those two grotesque dance movements, and the rondo burlesque with its snapping and sneering menace and contrapuntal viciousness. I mean, the emotions in this piece are so clear, even though it has no words and no subtext, that there's really no doubt what it's going to do, and there's no doubt what it expresses as you hear it. And it seems to me that very clarity is one of the things that has made it such a lucky piece on disc, because conductors and orchestras just get their hands on it and they run with it. They know where they are and feel confident about what they're saying. So let's get right to it. Let's start talking about some of these performances and see where we wind up, shall we? All right. We have to start at the beginning. As I said, Bruno Walter premiered the Ninth. He also prepared the score for publication. He, for example, added a harp part because he felt that Mahler's single harp needed a little reinforcement now and again, and it does. That was a smart move. And he also, added a couple like bass drum rolls at the end of the rondo burlesque, which Claudio Abbado removed. Perhaps rightly so. I'm of two minds about it. You can look at the original manuscript score, or, such as it was when Mahler left it. It was in very good shape. It's in the Morgan Library in New York on microfilm, and they also have the actual paper, which they don't let anyone touch usually. But it really is fascinating. And the most fascinating thing to see, I think, is if you look at the manuscript of Mahler's, I mean, the really clean manuscript. In the finale, as you know, the instruments begin to drop out. And in a normal score, the way a normal score is written, you've got, woodwinds, brass, percussion, strings. And so, you wind up with just the strings at the end. In Mahler's score, it goes like this. Because he doesn't have to stay on the same staves all the way through. So you see the orchestra getting smaller and smaller and smaller from both ends until there's just that simple line of strings playing the final chord at the very end when it all just dies out. There's something, I don't know, there's something incredibly moving about it. It really is. It's really quite fascinating to see. But anyway, back to the recordings. The first one was Bruno Walter's, this, just before the Anschluss historical moment of incredible importance with the Vienna Philharmonic. This is the performance that Roger Norrington quite falsely claims was the last ever recording where an orchestra played in the old way without vibrato, which, as Bruno Walter himself attested, was total nonsense, and you can hear is total nonsense. But anyway, it's a horrible performance. It's awful. It's rushed. It's horribly played. Bruno Walter was very, very unhappy with it. Of course, the sound from 1938 live is miserable. The finale is like 18 minutes long. The whole thing sounds just hasty. And, maybe it was the excitement of the Anschluss that was about to happen that had everybody really nervous. But I don't give a damn. I want to hear a great Mahler Ninth. And this is not a great Mahler Ninth. Bruno Walter felt that when he was able to remake it with the Columbia Symphony Orchestra, right here, that he had done a much, much better job. And he did, even though this performance isn't perfect. The orchestra wasn't great. The percussionists get lost at the recap of the Rondo Burlesque, the cymbals and bass drum with their boom, chick, come in a bar early. It's also not a fabulous performance, but it's a hell of a lot better than the Vienna one in just about every respect, not to mention sonically. So if you do want to hear Bruno Walter, and it's always a good idea to hear Bruno Walter and Mahler, then the one to get is the stereo remake, even though it's not perfect. And that's simply, I know that's sort of a radical opinion, because there are people who are incredibly devoted to that 1938 recording as a historical document of the First Order, and it is, but it's not a great version of the Ninth. Let us not kid ourselves, folks. Let's be musical rather than sentimental or historical, and that is my feeling on Bruno Walter and the Mahler Ninth. Now, the rest of these, I'm looking at this pile, it's like, holy cow, are all, in their way, marvelous performances of the Mahler Ninth. There are quite a few of them. One of the ones that I think may surprise you is, it's in this big box, but I have it separately too, Seiji Azawa and the Boston Symphony. This is a first-class Mahler Ninth. It has amazing textural transparency, especially in the second movement. You might think that it's a little bit underplayed in spots. I don't think so. I think it's proportioned beautifully. I really do. And the playing is magnificent throughout. It's really deeply moving. The first movement and the finale balance really, really well. There are a few other performances we'll see where that happens too, where the idea is to make sure that both ends of the symphony have equal weight, rather than having a huge first movement and a less huge finale, or dragging out the finale to incredible lengths to make it a super cosmic transcendent experience. Those are all worthwhile ways to do it. But this is one of the balanced versions, and it's one of the best. Now, if you think that Azawa's Boston performance was a little too emotionally cool, and I can understand that, then he redid it with the Saito Keenan Orchestra for Sony, and that one is just that much more passionate and heated. It's also a superb Mahler Ninth. So either Azawa is certainly worth considering, and I'm starting with that right away, and don't forget it as I throw out all of these other ones, because we're going to hear many, many more. Also, quite extraordinary, Gary Bertini's. This one has a really slow finale. It's about half an hour, but it's amazingly well sustained. It really is amazingly well sustained. And the playing throughout is so crisp and so clean and clear that it really, the whole thing just works. And the emotional intensity of it builds as the performance goes until you get to that finale, and it really works. It's a fantastic performance, and the capstone of Bertini's Mahler cycle. I was so happy that he was successful in the ninth, because there are a lot of Mahler cycles that are really very, very good, but they're just, why wimp out when you're getting to what's supposed to be the final big statement. Remember Ado de Vart's Mahler cycle? It was a great Mahler cycle, except for the sixth and the ninth, like the two where you really have to go for it. And he just wasn't able to. Well, Bertini does it. It's a magnificent cycle, the most consistent of all of them, really, in my opinion. And it ends with an absolutely phenomenal account of the ninth. Here's one that you may think is a sleeper. Schultes with the London Symphony. Now, as you may know, I'm not usually a fan of Schultes' work, but when you do great work, you do great work. And this Mahler Ninth is an absolutely terrific performance. It has, especially in the first movement, an almost Straussian voluptuousness to it. It's really rich with horns and harps and things. It sounds yummy. And the inner movements are really, really mean. They're Schulte at his best, lean, mean, and vicious. Bartók could have written them, that sort of thing. It's the hostility is really there. The brass just really strut their stuff. Now, the finale is about 22, 23 minutes-ish or so. It's one of the quicker ones in some ways. And you may find that not deep, I don't know, spiritual, whatever word you want to use, not deep enough. But I think it works very well in the context of a performance which is very, very eruptive and emotionally turbulent. So I think if you can still get this, it's around. I mean, I was able to get it. The Schulte Mahler 9 with the London Symphony is terrific. His remake, not so much. With Chicago, not nearly as good. And there's a weird moment in the first movement where, for some reason, somebody didn't mute the bells, and you hear them in the background somewhere, seemingly like offstage bells in the sixth. It's really weird. And there are all kinds of problems with the Chicago Ninth, frankly. In the execution, the sound was glassy, early digital. I was really surprised. I saw him do it live, and it was quite a bit better. But even so, it doesn't compare to the primal enthusiasm of his LSO ninth. We're going to stay in Britain for a second. Now, this one is a real sleeper. When it came out, I was really shocked and very pleasantly surprised. Libor Pesheck with the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic. This is on Virgin Classics. This is an absolutely first-rate Mahler Ninth. Again, it's a very voluptuous performance in the first movement. The horn playing and the orchestra in this performance is just astonishing. It's tremendous. But otherwise, it's just an exciting, maybe because of the orchestra, it wasn't quite as weighty as some others. You might think it's a little bit lightweight. And in some ways it is. Pesheck was that kind of conductor. It's a very Czech performance, lots of woodwinds and sort of aerated textures, but it's beautiful. It's beautiful and very, very well recorded and very exciting. And so if you are like stacked up on Mahler Ninths and you need a new Mahler Ninth hit and you think you've run out of options, consider Libor Pesheck with the Royal Liverpool Phil. Absolutely first rate. A very pleasant surprise. Also a very pleasant surprise, Court Mazur with the New York Philharmonic. This is like the Azawa. This is one of those balanced performances where the first movement you may think is a little bit underplayed, but the finale is extraordinary and of equal weight. And one of the things that makes this performance so wonderful, frankly, is the New York Philharmonic, because they're a great Mahler orchestra. They know how the music should go. And even if Mazur tends to want to underplay things a little bit, the natural sound of the orchestra, the balances between brass and winds and strings and the ample percussion, and they know how to make the right Mahler sounds at the climaxes, in the soft creepy bits, wherever the atmosphere calls for it. They understand the idiom, and you have to give the orchestra as much credit as you give the conductor in these works. You really do. There's a big difference between orchestras that know their Mahler, because that allows conductors who don't know it as well, or who aren't as idiomatic, you might think, to impose an interpretation on them without sacrificing that genuine Mahler sound that you want to hear. And the Mazur New York Phil performance on Teldec is one of those where that really happens. The orchestra makes its contribution as much as the conductor does, and the two make for a wonderful, wonderful, refreshing version of the Ninth. Next, Bernhard Haitink's first version with the Concertgebouw. I don't even know if he's made yeah, he has done another one, didn't he? You know, the thing about Haitink is that, you know, because he went off and, you know, complained about Mahler being special and you shouldn't make too many recordings of it, then he went off and did 100 billion of everything. He hasn't been big on making millions of recordings of the Ninth, I don't think. But his first with the Concertgebouw is still the best. This is the old Concertgebouw sound, you know, before they started sounding more or less like everybody else. And although they're still magnificent, I mean, in their way, but they had a special character in the 60s when this was made. You know, the trombones had that sort of tightly focused, narrow sound. And the way Philips recorded them was also sort of unusual. They hadn't learned how to put bass into their recordings yet. So there's a sort of lightness on the bottom. And the timpani had a very rounded, soft tone. And they use bell plates for the chimes in the first movement, which is actually horrible because you can barely hear them. They're these sort of muffled, muted things. But it doesn't matter because the playing here is so beautiful. It's so sharp and focused. It really is the rondo burlesque. I mean, this is one of the best ever, largely because the Concertgebouw winds are just fabulous, and Haitink keeps them together like it's amazing. It's just amazing. And again, this is a very, very rewarding performance if you're not looking to take yourself to the edge of the abyss every time you hear the Ninth. And I understand that. There are times when you want to have the emotion and the feeling without, you know, wanting to end it all when it's over. That's a good performance to consider for that reason. Totally at the opposite end of that is Klemperer. Not a slow performance, except, of course, in the scherzi and in the middle movements where he's a little slower. In the slow movements, he's a little faster. It's typical Klemperer. This is a performance of incredible emotional anguish. It sounds tortured. It's a struggle. You could feel the orchestra struggling and Klemperer struggling. And even though it's not slow, I mean, the climax is, it's not that they're so volcanic, it's just that they're torn out of the orchestra. You know, the finale, the adagio, the climax of the adagio, there's like, the woodwinds are so forwardly focused. There's like screeching at the top at that climax. It's agonizing. It really is. And incredibly moving. This was at the very end of Klemperer's life. He seemed to summon all of his resources to pour himself into this performance. And it's special. It's not your, as gramophone would often say, your Ninth for everyday listening, shall we say, but it's a special performance of the Ninth. Now we come to Leonard Bernstein. There are at least, not counting videos, 4 that we need to talk about. Recently, there was a release on Helicon with the Israel Philharmonic, which is really quite good. I saw him do it with the Israel Philharmonic in Carnegie Hall, and it was a stupendous performance. And that's a very good one, too, but I'm not going to deal with that one for the moment. There's one we have to get out of the way, which was his Berlin Philharmonic live one that won a Grammy, and everybody was thrilled about because it was Bernstein and it was Berlin, and they never did anything together, and Karajan let him do it, and it sucks. The playing is horrible. People have, they say that it has edge and it has tension. Oh, bull. Everything Bernstein did has edge and tension. And they have edge and tension, and they can play it because the Berlin Philharmonic trombones get lost at the climax of the finale and don't play it at all, which is really a mess. And there's all kinds of sort of slack ensemble and carelessness in that performance. Some people like that. They like to hear fallibility because they think it sounds edgy and dangerous. I just think sloppy is sloppy and slovenly is slovenly, and there's no reason you can't have both. This is not a zero-sum game, as I tell all of you Fort Wengler fans. You can have all of the edge and tension and excitement and danger and risk you want, but it's the conductor's job to make sure that the orchestra plays the damn thing. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. And that Bernstein Berlin Philharmonic was embarrassing. It should never have been released. And Bernstein was dead, and I would be very surprised if he would have allowed it had he been alive. So there are two Bernstein performances we need to talk about, the New York Phil and the Concertgebouw. And here they are. Both are worth having, I have to say. The New York Phil, as you might expect, is livelier and somewhat fresher than the remake. It has a quicker finale, 22, 23 minutes, than the Concertgebouw, which is 27, 28, 26. I don't know. It's one of the long ones. And the Concertgebouw recording has a first trumpet who's rather prominent in the mix. You may love it. He's wailing with tons of vibrato in the first movement, but others might find it somewhat annoying. It's not a great recording sonically, but the New York Phil one has all kinds of excitement and edge and a fabulous rondo burlesque. Oh my, they really dig into it. So that's a wonderful performance, and either Bernstein will do you well. He aside from that Berlin mishap, which is anything that could happen on the day, right? He almost never let you down in the ninth. And of course, his way with Mahler was Bernstein's Mahler. It was special. Next. Oh, yeah. How many more have we got? Oh, 5 more to go. Okay. I think that's enough, don't you? It's just unbelievable, isn't it? It really is astounding. And I know you'll have ones that you'll like too. And there are lots of them. I mean, I'm not trying to be exhaustive. I'm trying to be limited in a healthy way and show you what the range of interpretation is in great recordings of the symphony. But you can always add your own. Levine with the Philadelphia. I mean, this is the only recording that Philadelphia made of the piece, and it's exceptional. Absolutely exceptional. It has all of that early Levine sharpness and clarity, but you've got the Philadelphia sound, the fabulous strings, really a wonderful rondo burlesque, a very slow finale. This, when it came out, was radical for how slow the finale was. And actually, Levine, I think, did a live one. I don't know. He did it in Carnegie Hall with like a 32, 33-minute finale with the Met Orchestra or the Boston Symphony. I don't know. His tempos have got crazy slow, and not in a good way. At the end of his career before his premature retirement. But this Philadelphia Ninth is one of the great ones. It really is, along with the Philadelphia Fifth. They are spectacular Mahler performances, which, they weren't treated all that well by RCA. They came out on CD. The sound was sort of iffy. It's good that all of his Mahler's in a box and you can get it, because he never completed the cycle. He never did the eighth. He never did the second. And they're pretty great performances, quite a few of them. And this ninth is one of the best. It really is. But now I'm going to come to like my top 4. And some of them I think are going to surprise you. I think they will. I hope they do. First, Alan Gilbert, a new one on Bis with the Royal Stockholm Philharmonic Orchestra. This is one of those balanced ones. The first movement and last movement are 26 minutes each. The inner movements are really exciting, really well done. This is, again, everyone just rose to the occasion, and the sound is stunning. You really owe it to yourself to hear this recording. It's first rate. It's absolutely first rate. It was shocking when I heard it, because I didn't know what to expect. I really didn't. Gilbert is a very good, but hasn't gotten a lot of positive press. He certainly didn't in New York, but he's a good conductor. He knows what he's doing. And the orchestra is a good orchestra. And this is a performance that's the best testament to what Gilbert and this orchestra in Stockholm, where he was for a long time, what they could do when they are absolutely at their best. And when they are, they're completely world class. This is as great a Mahler Ninth as I ever hope to hear. And like I said, the performance is similar to the Mazur New York or the Azawa performances, especially his Saito Keenan performance, the Sony. They are phenomenally wonderful. So give Gilbert a shot. It may surprise you. And surprises are what we listen for, isn't it? I mean, isn't that great? Okay, top 3. Here we go. Karl Anschirl. I love this performance with the Czech Phil. I'm going to play you a bit of it, the climax of the first movement. It is like the Klemperer. It's an anguished performance. It's full of emotional pain and torment. The Rondo Burlesque isn't very fast, but oh, is it mean? It's nasty. Those woodwinds snap and snarl. The finale is rather quick, 23 and a half minutes, but that too has an urgency to it throughout. There's just this emotional, I don't know how to describe it. I mean, Entrel was a concentration camp survivor. You can tell when you listen to this performance. It's emotionally devastating. It really is. But it's also urgent. It also moves. It never slackens in its impulse. It's a tremendously impressive performance. One of the great sleepers in the Mahler 9 discography. And you really have to hear it. You owe it to yourself, if you love the Mahler 9th, to hear it. I'm going to play you a bit of it just so you get a sense of what I'm talking about. But really, it's extraordinary. Just listen for a moment. So I hope you sort of catch. I mean, you have to hear the whole thing. It's cumulative, the impression it makes. But it's a remarkable performance by a great orchestra that was at the peak of its form, and playing like as if their lives depended on it. It's a deeply moving experience. Really, it's emotionally gut wrenching. Next, this also, I mean, I guess I had to mention it at some point. Karajan, the live one, not the other one. Now, he did this symphony twice. He wasn't happy with the first one. He made a live recording. This is one of the great Mahler nights. Who are we kidding? The orchestra plays like gods. The interpretation is thrilling. The climaxes are just tremendous. It actually has a tam-tam in the first movement. One of the best ones, too. I mean, he doesn't mess with the scoring. And you'll remember, in the first version, in the Rondo Burlesque, the E-flat clarinet comes in a bar early at one point, when it goes dum bum ba dum dum da ba da 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 ba da 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 da, and Karajan has to slow down to let everyone else catch up. It's an amazing moment, really. I can't imagine why they didn't redo it, and but they didn't, and they released it that way, and it's still there as far as I know. But it doesn't compare to the intensity, the string playing in this. It's worth hearing just for the string section. I mean, at the climax of the Adagio, and the strings are, it's the rhythm of the opening. That heartbeat rhythm comes back in an augmented form, and first violins are just sustaining. I mean, you can hear the rosin catching fire on their bows. I mean, you can smell the smoke. The pressure of the sound is just extraordinary. It's amazing. It's worth hearing just for that. Now, you may prefer a more eruptive performance. In the first movement, Karajan doesn't really let the tempos flow freely in quite the way I think Mahler intended. He sounds perhaps a little stiff. I don't think it's stiffness. I just think it's a sort of Apollonian, noble, arch form. But wow, what a performance. And even the woodwinds in the Rondo Burlesque are really nice and screechy, and Karajan lets them do it. I was amazed. He doesn't overblend the sonority. He lets the orchestra play. Again, it's a symphony that seems to force everybody to do their best and to play the music with incredible intention and appropriateness, even if your whole aesthetic might be contrary to what Mahler was after. It's not here. It's not here. However, I got to pick one. I have to pick one, and I want to pick a modern one that has great sound, great playing, great interpretation, and does everything Mahler 9 should do. And for me, that is Seiji with the Concertgebouw. This is the third one with the Concertgebouw that we've been talking about, because the Concertgebouw is an astonishingly great Mahler orchestra. And, I just, sort of criticized the modern Concertgebouw for not sounding like the old Concertgebouw in the Haitink recording. But it doesn't matter here. They're still one of the world's greatest orchestras. They still have an incomparable woodwind section. And you can argue that the more international sound, a little more weight in the brass, a little more clarity in the percussion and hardness to the timpani, maybe that was a good thing, at least in some repertoire. And in this Mahler Ninth, this is, again, Seiji did an impressive Mahler cycle. It's not 100% fabulous because no one's is, but he really let it all out in the Ninth. This one has one of these slow finales. It's deliberate, but full of urgency and impulse. It has the right flexibility of tempo. It has the excitement in the two inner movements. It has apocalyptic climaxes, and it has a final adagio, it's just emotionally draining. It really is. When it's over, you just sit there and go, okay, that's it, folks. There's nothing else to be done. It's astonishingly beautiful. And, it really bothers me that this Ninth, when it came out, it didn't get much attention. I think by the time Seiji made this Mahler Ninth, there were just so many of them out there. I mean, you see it here. You see it in this little talk. It's going on for half an hour already. And how many performances have we mentioned now? Maybe 20 more? It's gotten out of hand. We can't keep track of it all. How do you, in some ways, my favorite Mahler Ninth is the one I'm listening to whenever I'm listening to it, because there's so many great ones to listen to. But I have to say, for just overall satisfaction, and I don't mean that in the, balanced way. I mean, this is an emotional cliffhanger of a performance with all the intensity that you can want. And at the end of the day, it's a total experience. It really is. Seiji and the Concertgebouw on Decca. If you haven't heard it, you really have to. It's amazing. It's an amazing, amazing experience. Beautiful and intense and devastating and everything you want the Mahler Ninth to be. So that is my summary of the Mahler Ninth. If you've stayed with me all this time, this talk has been as long as the longest version of the Adagio, and I apologize for that. But what are we going to do? What are we going to say? I mean, it's really amazing, isn't it? How this piece has blossomed in the hands of so many conductors and orchestras and their record labels. So we're going to keep on listening, folks, to Mahler's Ninth, aren't we? And hope that the run of great recordings continues indefinitely. Thank you so much for joining me and enduring this particularly devastating video. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Take care.